Okay. And again, Gabriel, I'll remember to send that to you right after class. And Adam, I'm going to send you a copy of the code right after class. So this is how to design a Windows Forms app. And when you look at what's in here, we've already covered virtually all of this stuff. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree, but I've taught it both ways. I've taught it where I just lecture in the chapter and we do nothing and you watch me talk. And by and large, people say, I hate that. You're not that exciting. And I understand that. I really do. I mean, you want to learn something, I think you learn best by just doing it. All right. And then, if you got questions, it'll make a lot more sense. All right. So, how to set options for a new project? Well, take a look at what's in here. This, I do want to show you this because it's kind of important. Let me double check and see if they've changed this or not. So, tools, options. Wasn't tools options. It was something else. It was tools, customize, was it? No. Tools. That's it. Okay. Yeah, that's what I want. Okay. So I come in here and I'm like, you know what? Yeah, he said I can grab this thing and I can put it over here and I can grab this one and put it down here. And I can even probably take that toolbox. Oh, well, I can put that on. Oh man, I wish I wouldn't have done any of that stuff. All right. I don't think Control Z is going to get you anywhere. It's not. So you come back in here and you go to Tools and you go to Import and Export Settings. And you say, hey, reset all settings. And next, and it says, do you want to save the settings you currently have? No. So it says, no. I want to say, oops, no, just reset all the settings. So I go to next. I want to make sure here I choose Visual C#. Do you see this? All right. And then click Finish. And ideally, at least, when I click Close, everything's gone back to where it was. All right. So that way, if you do decide you want to move stuff around, but you don't like it, you can go back. You can also save that setting. And so if you've got a setting, you can set it up and save a setting and go back and forth even between them. All right. This isn't terrible in my opinion, so I just keep it like this. All right. But this is the dialog box, and as it says in there, notice this is a key thing, project location. I showed you how to set that location at the beginning. You're going to want to do that because if you don't, it saves it someplace out on your C drive under program files, five or six levels deep. You don't want that. Okay? And there's other stuff that you can set here as well, just so you know. Creating a new project, we already did this. This is the 2015. Our interface is different. That's the other reason I didn't want to show it to you like this. All right. Designing a form, they have you build this one. I think the one we did at least rivals with this one, if it's not harder. But they show in there, you can see what their labels are. You can see what their text boxes are. You can see how the discount amount and the total are read-only, so you know how to change those now. All right. The buttons. And then they explain what all this stuff is. Again, text boxes can be used either for input or for output. All right, labels are basically headings. Buttons, typically you double click on a button and that brings up the click event for the button. And that's typically what you want to have happen. All right, so when you click that button, you want the magic to happen, the form to clear, the calculation to be made, to ask whether or not they want to exit, type of an idea. All right. And so there it is if you need more. How to add controls. I showed you different ways that you could add them. If you remember, you can double click on it in the toolbox and it puts it automatically in the upper left-hand corner. I like to just click on the one I want and drag it out there. All right. I start to think about when I get an assignment or give an assignment or whatever is, okay, how would I make it? And I just kind of draw it out. Now, last semester, these guys, they did something, they used a product called Balsamic Mockup, and they mocked up what their interfaces would look like. You actually could use that on here. That's a little overkill, all right? But it's not hard. You can paint an interface. It's funny, and again, you guys probably have heard this, but years ago I was teaching in class, and I said, programmers know how to write code to make something happen. I said, people who can't program can oftentimes make very nice-looking interfaces. It's not that hard to do. I said I could teach a monkey to make an interface, and probably in a half an hour he'll do it better than you. So, of course, the period ended, and one of my students went upstairs and told my boss I just called the class monkeys, and proceeded, I guess, give me a whole tirade, but it was all, according to my boss, 4-letter words about what an asshole I was. So the next day, what I did was I brought him down, and I said, "No, I don't know who said this, but evidently one of you did. First of all, I never said it." And they were all like, "No, you never said that. Second of all, none of you are monkeys. I don't care what you look like. I don't care your gender, your sexual preference, your color. I don't care. None of you are." And I said, "Now, if you got a problem, tell him." And I walked out, and I came back an hour later. And they all figured out who it was. They never said, I never asked who said it, but they said, "Don't worry, we took care of them." So, all right. And if we need to do the same thing here, we'll do it here. So here's the interface. You know now that label comes out looking real little, and you know how to change the size of that label. So we did that. 3 ways to add a control. I showed them all to you. You did them probably. All right. To select a control on a form, click it. You can move it around. It'll get the handles, etc. You can also go into the properties window and size things in there. For instance, if I go back here, I'm not going to resize them. These are all locked anyway. But if I come back in here, you'll notice hourly rate, it's got a size, 294.32. So it's always width by height. So it's 294 pixels wide, or not pixels, whatever their units are, and 32 high. All right. But that's another way that you can change things if you want to change them in here. All right. There's really no difference between using the two of them. All right. How to set properties? Well, again, we've talked about this. You go in here. Now, notice that they have this, and I'll put this in just so you see it because I'm trying to be complete here. So for the exit right here, I'm going to go in, and where I've got the text for exit, there it is. I'm going to put E ampersand XIT. Everybody see where it says exit? Can you see how it changed? There's an underscore under the X. So now when I run this, I should also be able to do an Alt X. Let's see. It's either Alt X or Control X, but I believe it's Alt. So Alt X. Do I want to quit? Just another thing that you can do. I mean, you can go nuts with this stuff, and you can put it on everything if that's what you really want to do. All right. Oops, I don't care about that. I do care about that. There we go. All right. The F1 I already mentioned to you. I'm sure not going to show you that again. All right. You will notice when you look in here that there will be things in here that have plus signs. Can you see that? If I click on the plus sign, can you see that it opens something? And when you click on the minus, it closes it. So there's more properties in here than what are shown, is what I'm telling you. In addition, most controls have properties that you can change, and you can change them in code. But you can't change them in the designer. So how do I know what those are? You know, it's like, okay, I understand what you're saying, but how would I know that? Well, I'm going to go, for example, I'm going to go over to the calculate button. All right. And we did this before, but I'm going to put underneath this, I'm going to put text box gross pay again. Okay, but instead of dot text, I'm just going to hit a period. Those are all things I can change. Some of those are going to be in the properties window. You may say, well, there's not that many. Yeah, there are. And there'll be different things that are in there based upon whether what you're doing is a text box or it's a label or it's a button, etc. It'll change based on that stuff. All right. Okay. Some common properties here. The name, we already went over that. All right. And the importance of the name. The text, I think you've already seen. Here's some other stuff. I showed you the accept. I showed you the cancel. I didn't show you start position. Let's look at that. And what start position? It's for the form. So I click on an empty spot on the form, and I go down here and I find start position. And it's set to Windows default. Well, I'm going to click, and notice there's center screen. So I'm going to choose that one, and I'm going to run it. It pretty much was centered anyway before, but now it's right in the center of the screen. All right. but you might have a reason that you want it to be in a corner, or you've got some control over where it goes. Enabled, if you disabled something, you don't disable it. There's no disabled property. You set enabled as a Boolean. So if you set enabled to false, it's disabled. Does that make sense? If you set enabled to true, it's enabled. All right. Oh, you looked at read only. We did the tab index. The tab stop. I never play with that stuff, but you can. We did the text align already. All right. How to add navigation features. We did the tab order to adjust the tab index. I just showed you the access keys. It says you cannot set an access key for a text box. All right, basically they're set up for buttons. That's typically, I think that's the only thing I've ever seen them used with. How to set the enter and escape, that's the accept and the cancel, so you've seen that. All right, they say in chapter 10, you learn how to use the tab order view. Guess what? I already showed you that. We did view tab order, so we already did that one. All right, so here's the properties that they set for the thing that they made. So if you wanted to go build this, you could. I'm not saying build it, or I'm not saying not build it. You do what you want to do with it. All right, so you set all those properties up. Naming and saving files. Let's take a quick look at that. So let's just pretend for a second that, notice this is called Form 1. If I wanted to change the name, it's, you go down here, it's Form 1. All right. You can right mouse click on here and choose rename. Now, why might you want to do that? Because later on in the semester, my hope is, because I've not done this with the other classes, but I think I'm going to do it with you. We're going to, with this thing right here, we'll build a start screen, and we'll have a bunch of radio buttons in there, and we'll say, what kind of an employee are you? Maybe we'll have 4 kinds of employees. We'll have an hourly employee, a commission employee, what's the word I'm looking for? Pieceworker employee, and something like that. All right, 3, 4, whatever. And then based on that, when you choose one of those radio buttons and you click a button to say go there, it'll bring up a new form, like this one or a different one. So when we do that, then we might not want to call these Form 1, Form 2, etc. Why? Because we want to give the ability to go back and forth between forms. So giving them good names makes it much easier for you to understand what's going on. All right, you don't have to worry about what their numbers, etc. are. All right, so you can rename anything: a file, a project, a solution, control. You've already seen that with the controls, and that's it. So we've already hit chapter 2. All right, anybody, if you have a problem with the way I'm doing this, going over something like this first and then going over it in the book, you got to let me know. All right, by Monday, I've got to go look through this weekend and see what Evan is doing for homework. I didn't send him an email, but I will. And I'm going to try to give you your homework, the stuff out there on Monday already. So let's go into chapter 3. We may finish it, we may not. Is it? Nah, it's long enough. An introduction to coding, how to add code to a form, you know that. More coding skills, how to make code more readable, how to run, test, and debug. We've gone through most of this stuff already. Now, what they mention here, and this might be a little confusing to you, is C#, like Java, all right? C# is what's called an object-oriented programming language. Everything you do in there is an object. What do I mean? You've got 3 button objects right there. Each button object is part of what's called the button class. All right, you've got 7 text box objects in there. You've got 8 label objects in there. That's what our program is made of. All right, now on the other hand, these guys last semester, they took JavaScript, and we didn't have time to go through the whole book, but we looked through some of the stuff in the last week. But JavaScript is called object-based. The difference between object-oriented and object-based is an object-oriented language like this, you have to use objects with everything you do. With an object-based language like JavaScript, you have object-oriented capabilities which you can choose to use or not use. All right? If you want a little more on that, objects are made up of methods and properties. So if I made an object is what's called an instance of a class. So if I made a class called person, I might give it objects like eye color, hair color, height, weight. All right, those would literally be called properties of the object. And if I gave, I could create methods, which are routines. Well, what can a person do? Eat, drink, sleep, etc. And an object only has the properties and the methods that you give it. All right. Because I remember talking about this and giving this lecture years ago, and we did like eat and we did sleep. And somebody said, well, they can drink too. It's not unless you give them the ability to drink. All right. So when you start to create your own objects, they're only as smart as you make them. And again, this is another time I got in trouble years ago. I said the computer is only as smart as the person who's sitting in front of it. And a woman came up to me at the break and said, you just called me an idiot. And I thought, no, you kind of just called yourself an idiot. But I didn't say anything. I said, well, if I offended you in any way, I apologize. But all I'm saying is the computer has the intellect of an 18-month-old child. And you know as well as I do, you can beat on a computer and you can hit the keys hard. It doesn't make it work any better. It might break it. Just like with an 18-month-old child, you can yell at them and they're not going to do what you want them to do any more than they are if you're going to talk nice to them. Computers typically know a couple hundred words. And even in most languages, a couple hundred words. All right. So an object, as they say, is a self-contained unit with code and data. When we get to chapter 12, we're going to create our own objects. All right. A class is a blueprint that defines what each object will look like. So an object is an instance of a class. When you create objects from a class, it's called instancing or instantiation. All right. Properties are the characteristics. Methods are the behaviors. All right. And events are basically ways that different objects can communicate with one another. All right. So they're showing you here the Intellisense. Again, hopefully you've already seen that. If you don't like it, typically when it comes up, if you hit the escape key, the Intellisense goes away for that thing that you were working on. So if that bugs you, that's how to get rid of it. You'll notice here, they're talking properties versus methods. Methods always have parentheses. Those parentheses may have something inside. They may not. All right. And an example I've used, you guys have probably heard it before. It's like if I say clean the room, you go, well, what room? That might be something I put in the parentheses telling you which room I want you to clean. All right. If I'm telling the system to add two numbers, I may have to pass the two numbers into that routine to tell them which two I want them to add. That kind of thing. All right. A click is an example of an event. You've already seen the click. All right. So we're going to get into that in more depth as we get going in here. So, like many other programming languages, C# is what's called, basically, it's an event-driven programming language. It sits there. Now, I'm not asking you this, I'm telling you this. But right here, if I run this program, and I never enter anything into a text box, and I never click a button, it'll sit there forever. It'll sit there longer than I'll be sitting here on this earth if I really wanted to do that. All right. But even once I put in a number here and a number here, I don't get anything here until I click this. So it's waiting for a click event so it can react. All right. So once I do, boom, now it's in there. All right. And I didn't put any code in here that said, hey, I got to make sure there's something in these boxes. So it works. All right. But an event-driven programming language basically just sits there and cycles through and through and through it. It's looking for something that happens. And it'll react to what happens. And it'll react to what happens based on the code you have added. Usually in most programming languages, there's very little code that has been put in by the system to make it react. Sometimes it depends on what it is you're working on. All right, but usually that's your job. So here's some different events. Click, double click. With the enter and leave, sometimes that's with the mouse. There's like mouse over, mouse up, mouse down. So if you were programming a game, all right, you might do some of those mouse events, for example. Notice with the form load, the form closing, that means it's not closed yet. So I probably could have taken like that exit code that we we put in and put it in the form closing event instead of having a button. Closed? No, it's already closed. Now there's nothing I can do. All right. How to create an event handler for a form? Well, what are they saying there? You double click on it. That's it. So that's the name of the control. You double click on it, you get its underscore click event. You can add other things. I've already shown you this, but again, if I go back over to here, all right, and I go over to here, notice I've got something right now in the click event. There's nothing in here, for example, in the enter event. Okay, but I could put something in there. I could put it in any of these things if I wanted to do that. All right. Again, go. I already told you about Intellisense. All right, it'll become more important as we go on, and there'll be times you'll probably really want to use it. All right, it'll make your life a little bit easier when you're searching for something. So here's the event handlers they've added for this simple form they have. So again, I'm not saying this is going to make sense. We did a simple if statement, if you remember, in our exit button, if a certain condition is true. So you can imagine you can be going down a road and you can either, let's say this is a one-way street, that maybe it goes like this. Well, you're going to turn left, right? You don't have any choice. So that's if this, do this. Sometimes you can do that. And it's if this, do this, else do that. Sometimes it's Los Angeles and you've got that. And it's if this, do this, else if this, do this, else if it's do this, else if it's do this, else do this, else. And we're going to get into all that stuff in later chapters. All right. Yeah, I was surprised to remember how to format something in a currency format. All right. There's other ones that you can use too. If we wanted to make sure, I'm going to show you these because I'm trying to be complete here. For the, whoops, not that. Oh, that was stupid. But for the program that we had here, for instance, let's say in here, for the hours worked and the hourly rate, I could take those. I mean, hourly rate would make sense to make that also be, I could have made that, set that up so that it was currency. But this, no, that wouldn't make much sense to put a $sign there. But instead of putting a C, I could put an F in there, which means like floating point. I could put like F2 and it'll put it to 2 decimal places if I want to do that. All right, so there's a lot of different ways, and we'll go over much of that stuff as we go on in here. That's the other class. Let's see. So take a look through this when you get a chance, and see how much of it does or does not make sense to you, because this is where we're heading as we get going, okay? All right, use spaces to separate words. Again, it's a case-sensitive language, so the exact capitalization has to be correct. End each statement with a semicolon, different than JavaScript. JavaScript likes it when you end with a semicolon, but if you forget, it basically puts one in there for you. You don't see it, but it implicitly puts one in there for you. All right. Each block of code in here must be between curly braces. This is all stuff that we're going to be going over. If you haven't made any mistakes yet, well, good for you, seriously. But, again, I always mention this story because I always remember this. When I went back and took a class the next semester in the one in my regular school, we had our first program, and we used a language called COBOL that's still around, but it's not used as often anymore. Why is it still around? Because there's 6 trillion lines of COBOL code in the world. So it's not going anywhere. But it stands for Common Business Oriented Language, and you have to end stuff with periods and do a bunch of other stuff. I did my first program, I always remember, 112 errors. All right. The guy next to me had 1 error, fixed it, and left. And I'm like, wow, he must be really good. Well, he ended up becoming a friend of mine. All right. And he wasn't any better than I was, and he wasn't any worse. But getting all those errors helped because I worked through them and got it to work. The next program, I missed a couple periods, and it jumped from 112 errors to like 20. All right. You should always debug, which is getting the bugs out of your program from the top down. It's really, it's kind of easier to say, well, I know what that one is. You can do that too. But you'll notice, if you didn't notice this already, I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to leave off that semicolon. I'm purposely removing that. And then I'm going to go back. Let's see. Second, let me go up. View error list. There we go. And see, it's already showing me that there's an error. And if I was somewhere over here and I didn't know where it was, I can double click on it. It does the best it can to show me where the error is. Now, what you can, sometimes when you get an error like that, it might be higher up in the code, but it should never be lower in your code because it hasn't executed that stuff that's lower in your code. It hasn't done that yet. All right. More coding skills. Well, they talk about a readable style. You can do this. You can also write it like that. I'm not going to have to ask you which one's easier to read. But you may or may not be aware of this. When you run your program, a program that's in the software called the compiler runs. And it's trying to convert all the stuff that you put in English into the zeros and ones the computer can understand. All right, the first thing the compiler does is it removes every bit of white space in your program. It doesn't need it. So comments, white space, etc., that's put in for your benefit. All right, but you should take advantage of it. Again, use indentation and spaces to align statements and blocks. Use spaces to separate words. Use blank lines. I mean, don't go nuts. I've had students who've done that before. Oh, I like to put like 10 blank lines between each one of my methods. I don't know why you do that. But a line, even sometimes two, not a problem. As it says, as you enter code, Visual Studio automatically adjusts formatting by default. One thing that sometimes drives people nuts is you come in here and you're like, oh, let me see if I got something here. I want all this stuff to line up. Notice that now that it's been put in, if I really want to do that, now I can. See that? But while I'm putting it in, it automatically just puts a space in between, one space in between everything. So you've got to put it in, and if that really bugs you, you've got to go back and do it manually. Now, is there a way to do it the other way? I don't know. I've never checked. All right. Comments we talked about. That is a multi-line comment because it starts with a /* and it ends with a //. You want to do that, make cute little boxes, go ahead and do that. I don't care. Some people like to do this and just have like just this line right there. And they put that like between each one of their routines. Go ahead and do that. All right. And if you say, oh, I don't want to do that, then don't do that. All right. It should be easy for you to read and understand. Some people, when they put comments in like this, they put it off to the right. Some people put it on the line above. Again, you should be trying to establish your own coding style now. And it's something you should stick to. All right. You may go to work for a company, because I've done this, where they tell you how to code. I've gone to places that have style manuals. You will do it like this. Why? Because everybody does, and it makes it much easier when you debug someone else's code to know exactly how it's set up. That makes some sense. All right. Comments do not make the program run any faster. If anything, they slow it down, because the system, the compiler's got to get rid of all those comments at the start, but they don't slow it down a lot. All right. The text editor toolbar, I did mention this to you before. I'm going to say it again, though. Now you see it. This is one toolbar right here, as you can see. If I right mouse click here, those are all the toolbars that you can use. All right. What's kind of neat, and you may have seen this already, you may not have. Let's assume for a second this routine right here, this routine is not working. And it's bugging the heck out of me. But what we've been doing is we've been writing the whole thing and then testing it. We should really write a little bit and test, write a little bit and test. But the point is, this routine, let's just say it's not working, and I'm getting really miffed. So with all of it highlighted like this, I can come over. You see these two things over here? If I click the one on the left, it highlights it, it'll comment out an entire block of code. If I do the one next to it, it'll uncomment. So you can do whole blocks of code at a time. Which, I mean, the other way I could do that is I could come in here and do a /* right here, and then down here I could do a //. I could do that too. All right. Whatever way is, again, whatever way is easier for you is the way you should use. You can collapse entire regions of code. What does that mean? Well, notice that minus sign here? Is that pretty obvious what I just did? Sometimes if you got some code that's hundreds of lines long, you might want to do that. All right. Believe it or not, we're just about finished. Zooming in and zooming out, you can read that on your own. I don't like using that. All right. How to print the source code. Okay, you can print it out if you want to, I guess. They tell you here again how to zoom in and zoom out. You want to use that, go ahead and use it. There is something in here, as it says, that are called code snippets. For what we're doing, they're not going to help you very much. I'll let you take a read on that if you're interested, but it'll just throw in a few lines of code. Usually it'll throw in a shell. So it'll show you what you need type of thing. And as it says, to insert a code snippet, right-click in the code editor and insert and select the insert, all right, snippet command from the resulting menu. Okay. All right. I think it's best not to use it because you're learning how to do this stuff. All right. And refactoring code, I think this is it for the chapter. No, not quite. But refactoring, it says, when you refactor, what the system will try to do if it refactors is it tries to say, hey, you're doing this, and it's kind of redundant. So it'll try to give you, some suggestions on how your code can run better. Typically, when you refactor, that's what you're doing. You're trying to cut down the size of the amount of code that you have. Sometimes you do it because you just had a bad algorithm. So you refactor so it's a better algorithm. All right. Annotations in the scroll bar. Again, when you start going in here, there'll be stuff in here. Probably the most important thing that I didn't mention so far is, let's assume that I did this entire program and I've got text box hours and I spell hours wrong. I put a Z on the end instead of an S or something like that. All right, I can go back in and I can change it in my design mode, but it doesn't change my code. So I can come in and do a Control F, which is a find. All right, and if I go over to here and do it again, it's not going to show it now, but there's a replace. So there's a find and replace. You can also get to it by edit, and there is a find and replace. I know there's one in here someplace too. All right, and if you notice under edit, that's where the refactor is. So if you want to take a look at some of that stuff, you can. Getting the help information, well, part of that, again, is hitting the F1 to get the Online Visual Studio help. All right. Running the project, you know how to run it already. Again, you can also click debug and run it from there, but I always just click that green checkbox there. Once you're in run mode, to get out, you click the red square, you click it, and you go back into design mode. All right, this is setting those breakpoints that we talked about. This is an exception. All right, I didn't show you that, but let's quickly look at one of those. We're just about finished. So I'm going to run the program again. And I'm going to put nothing in these boxes. And now I'm going to click calculate. See that? They showed it was gold and now it's red. It's showing, it says, hey, it tried to convert what was in there to a double, and there was nothing there to convert. So it's trying to help you. All right, and there's other things that you can do, and we'll get into that in later classes as well to try to make that easier for you. Come on. Oh, okay. For some reason, let's see. It's because that's still running. So I got to close that. Now it should, there we go. All right. Runtime errors you don't discover until the program's running. What I just showed you was a runtime error. I didn't know there was an error until I tried to click that button. Okay. Now, if I put nothing in, I'm not going to bring the interface up again, but if I put nothing in there and I click the clear button, it still goes and clears all that stuff out. That's not an error. There's just nothing to clear. It'll go through and try to do that, but it's already clear. All right. All right. As it says, again, you can go in there and you can try to see, that's what I just tried to show you. And that's pretty much it. So the plan then right now, and unless I don't have, for some reason, I didn't bring the, I removed the syllabus. But before we go on into this, I think Monday and Tuesday will both be lab days. All right, I think the way it's set up right now, Monday's lab, Tuesday's lab, so I've got to get you homework. I will have that. If I find what Evan has done this weekend, I will send it to you. All right, so you can look at, I'm not saying you have to do a darn thing over the weekend, that's up to you. But you will have a minimum of 8 hours, 4 hours, or 350 on Monday and 350 on Tuesday. On Wednesday, I will plan some kind of pretest for you. All right, and you will have time, a lot of time to work on that. And then I think that's the way it's set up. And Thursday of next week, so a week from yesterday, will be your first test. So a week from today on Friday, we're going to go into section 2 of the book. Again, we're not seeing how fast we can run through this. Right? Hopefully I'm not running through it too fast, and if I am, you'll let me know. And there, chapter 4, arithmetic operations. You already know what those are. You learn those in grade school or junior high. Plus, minus, multiply, divide, etc. So we'll go through those. Chapter 5, we'll go through selection and iteration. So that'll be how to write if statements for real and write loops. Chapter 7, we'll start to look, then we'll look at actually validating the stuff that we've been putting in. 8 is that'll be the hardest chapter in the book so far once we get to that point, because we'll work with arrays. All right, if you don't know what they are, don't worry about it. Chapter 9, we'll do dates and strings. Chapter 10, it's like a miscellaneous type of chapter, stuff we've had before. And 11 looks at the debugger in some depth and breadth of coverage. All right, so that's what you've got to look forward to. Looks like it's 11:51. I guess I did hear about it yesterday. I don't know if anybody was loud, but Mr. Corrigan kind of, you let him go early yesterday. I don't think he liked that. All right, and I'm not saying any of you were loud or anything. I have no idea. All right, but we've got, it looks like, let's check on here. This is what I go by, time.is. So we've got like 3.5 minutes. All right, the other thing, please just do this. If you do one thing for me, all right, don't be the kind of person that, 5 minutes, like at 11:50, you're standing by that door with your coat on and you're like this, because Miss Bruggeman will walk by. She might only come up to my shoulders, but she scares me in that, she'll bring me in the office and she'll yell at you without ever raising her voice. But she's one of those kind of people, and she's terrific. She's the best thing, that's one of the best things in this institution. All right, but she will occasionally walk by. She will also, she has no problem, if she feels like it, walking in here and saying, I noticed that your student over here didn't have the mask over his nose. I noticed so-and-so had white socks on, and she'll sit there and she'll do that. All right, the way it used to be even before you guys got here, I almost had to line people up in the morning to make sure they were following protocol. And one of the biggest ones now is that it really bugs them. You're not supposed to wear tennis shoes. Again, don't ask me why. That's just the way they are. The idea is this is almost supposed to be like a business suit, and you get that work ethic grade, so you are showing good work ethic. And I may have told you, you guys probably heard this, but I may or may not have told you guys. I still remember this a couple years ago. Twice a year, we meet as what's called an advisory committee, where people from business and industry come in. Usually in fall, it's people from business and industry, and in spring, they bring back 2 or 3 dozen alumni, and what's going right, what's going wrong with the program. And when I went there a couple of years ago, a guy came up to me, introduced himself to me, where do you work, what do you teach exactly, and I told him, and he's like, oh, he was from St. Louis, because that's where our meetings always are. But and he said to me, the last 3 years I've only hired ranking people. And I said, really? Why is that? He said, because your work ethic means something. They're there at 5:02. They're there till 5 after. And he said, I guess I lied to you, because a year ago I hired somebody who wasn't from Rankin, and he lasted a week. The first day he was 5 minutes late. The second day he was 10 minutes late. The third day he was over an hour late. So I told him at the end of the day to not come back anymore. What he told me. So, that's the kind of stuff that I'm grading you on for your work ethic grade. All right, just so you know. So if you have any questions on that kind of stuff. All right, so you got all that, and I managed to get it. So you got 50 seconds. As soon as this hits 11:55, just bang, go, just take off. Have a good weekend.